One of the areas of finance I am most skeptical about is finding a financial advisor who's actually good at what they do and will put your interests first. Unfortunately, there's a lot of not so great things out in the wealth management industry, but luckily we are sitting down with James Vermillion, who's going to give you all of the things that you need to know in order to find the right financial advisor for you and really understand what you should be looking for when interviewing and talking to financial advisors. James Vermillion is from Vermillion Private Wealth and has started his own firm after going from the Air Force to being in the bourbon business to working at a large financial advisory practice where he wasn't always able to put his clients' interests at heart because it would go against what was best for the firm, and instead started his own practice where he can really focus on building those relationships. What he's learned is that preparation is key above anything else, and if you are properly prepared, that is the most important thing in business. And second is how to find that peak performance in your career and life. James actually hosts a podcast called the Bulls, Bears, and Bourbon podcast, which I had the pleasure of sitting down on, so definitely go check out that episode. We got to sip some bourbon and talk a little bit about money and finances, so definitely go check that out. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course your host of the Silicon Alley podcast, where it is my job to talk to top performers, entrepreneurs, and VCs to understand what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. If you have not already, please go ahead and pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes air every Friday. And without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's finance-focused episode of the Silicon Alley podcast featuring the James Vermillion. Are you interested in growing and scaling your business? Welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast, where you'll hear from entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and top performers on what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. You'll walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your own business and life. Now to William Glass, the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. James, welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Yeah, good to talk to you again, William.
I know, yeah. I feel like we just did this, a couple weeks ago, but inversed, sat down on the...
I'm on your turf now, man, so.
Exactly, yeah. And so if you don't know what I'm referencing, James hosts a podcast called Bulls, Bears, and Bourbon, which is a lot of fun. We had a very strong rye during that conversation, which was delicious, but man, I was feeling it at the end there.
Yeah, it was not mild, let's put it that way. But this is not bourbon in my glass, by the way. It's just coffee today. So
fair enough. Well, yeah, I'm excited to dive in. We kind of touched on it, and you've got a really interesting background as an entrepreneur in finance, doing all these various things. But I'd love to just start out and understand, before you got into your career, you were in the Air Force. Can you talk to me a little bit about your time in the Air Force and how that's kind of impacted you moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. The reason I went into the Air Force, yes, I'm patriotic. Yes, I love America and all those things. But if I'm being perfectly honest, the reason I joined the Air Force was to get an education. And I was junior, senior in high school, and I was talking with my mom, how are we going to pay for this college thing? What's the situation? And so she and I sat down, and I actually did want to join the military at some point. Didn't really know. Both my parents were in the Air Force. Didn't really know about the officer side of things. And my mom, came up with, she was like, have you looked into this ROTC scholarship? And I hadn't heard of it. We didn't have ROTC at our school at the time. I think they may have it now as far as junior ROTC, but so that sounded really good. So I went through that process of, applying for that ROTC scholarship, and was very lucky to get that, and had a 4-year ride to the University of Kentucky, which is about 45 minutes from my hometown in Frankfurt. So that worked out great. So that's kind of how I ended up in the Air Force. But what a unique experience that was, to be thrust at age 22 as an officer into a leadership role, not knowing what the hell you're doing, and trying to figure it out step by step and day by day. And it really learned so many things, that whole trial by fire and that sort of thing. That's really what it was. And a lot of those lessons directly correlated with trying to start a business. Whereas, you're constantly putting out fires, you're constantly learning new things. You're constantly realizing you're ill-equipped in certain areas and trying to right those before they get out of hand. So it was definitely a great learning experience, a great leadership opportunity, great educational opportunity. And it just kind of set the stage for my future. It was never something I intended to make a career of, really. But it's something I definitely have no regrets about. It was a fun, exciting, and very educational experience for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's one of the great things about what the military and ROTC scholarship, right, is the ability to go get an education and take advantage of some of the benefits that are unique when you choose to serve the country. What have you translated into your entrepreneurial career? I'm curious if there's anything specific that like you've really, really taken. You mentioned trial by fire, learning to overcome obstacles. What are some of the things that you as an entrepreneur really look back on and say, I can tie that back to my time in the Air Force?
Well, I think the cliche answer would probably revolve around discipline, right? I mean, that's kind of the thing when people think of when they think of serving in the military, going through boot camp and waking up early and, hospital corners on your bed. And don't get me wrong, all of those lessons are super valuable. I think I was a fairly disciplined person even before that. So it was a good fit for me personally. But really, the lessons that I think resonated and carried over the most were more relational because here I was, a 22-year-old kid, didn't know anything about what I was doing. I ended up being a munitions maintenance officer working on components for nuclear weapons, basically. So obviously, I had no idea. I had no background. I was a political science major, for crying out loud. And so here I was working on the nuclear program in the Air Force. And I was, quote unquote, in charge of or overseeing people who had 25 years of experience. And, the classic young officer mistake is to walk into the shop like you own the place and start telling people how smart you are and how much better you're going to make things. And I learned from my parents who were enlisted and who are very incredible people and were in the Air Force. That's not a good approach. That's not going to get you very far. And so I really tried to embrace and learn from the people that were there. And I realized pretty quickly that if I were going to be successful in what I was trying to do, was going to be because of the people around me, not because of me. So I've always tried to kind of take those lessons and apply them. Even, for my business with Vermillion Private Wealth, I'm a solo practitioner, but relationships are still the most important part of my business.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you diving in there. And I think that's a really important mistake that I know when I first moved into management and was managing people and, a couple people that were older than me, I made some of those mistakes, right? That, I could do it better than, the other boss, right? Like, and then you get in there and you're like, wow, this is a lot different than what I anticipated. So that's incredible that you came in with that knowledge and your parents helped to guide you, because it's definitely a mistake that is a common one.
My dad made very sure that I wouldn't do that. I'll put it that way. And I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that's really interesting is that it sounds like you made the decision. You sat down with your mom. It sounded like it was you sitting down saying, hey, how are we going to do this whole college thing? Right. So there's a focus, and it sounds like, about planning and thinking about finances. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because you've obviously ended up in wealth management. So you're interested in investing in finance, but have you always had that interest?
That was a hell of a good transition, I've got to say. So, yeah, I think so. One thing I've always been proud of with my parents is they both have done better than where they came from. And I don't mean better as far as people, I just mean financially and being in a position to provide us with opportunities. And I've always taken that very seriously and tried to not screw that up and hopefully continue that and provide my children. I have one daughter now with even better opportunities than I had. So I've always taken that really seriously. And I was, a really good student in high school for the most part. And no one in my family had graduated from college. So we hadn't gone through that before. So yeah, there was an element of that, me thinking forward. I knew I wanted to advance my education. Didn't really know exactly what that would look like. And my parents knew as well. And they obviously wanted that for me. So I think it was a combination of my parents realizing that's what I wanted to do and wanting to be available to help me, But certainly in my mind as well, there was the thought of what do I need to do next? What's the best move for me? Kind of looking forward in my life and where I want to be.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And so when you came out of the Air Force, you ended up in finance. Can you talk to me about that transition? And definitely want to get into what ultimately led you to want to strike out on your own, and talk about some of the other first entrepreneurial endeavors that you've had.
Yeah, and I won't give my whole life story here because there are a lot of twists and turns, I think. But it really started when I got out of the Air Force. Like I said, I knew it wasn't going to be a career. I wasn't going to be a lifer. I really
Yeah.
never planned on it. I did consider it a little bit, but never too seriously. I was already married, and we were ready to move back to Kentucky and go ahead and put some roots in and things like that. So that was kind of off the table at that point. And I actually got a call from a very good friend, one of my best friends from high school, who was working in the bourbon business. He said, "Hey, are you still getting out? Are you still moving back? What's that looking like? Someone at our company just left, and I think you'd be a great fit." So I ended up in the bourbon business working for Blanton's Bourbon, which is a fantastic product out of Buffalo Trace. If you haven't had it, go try it. It's amazing. And I did that for a while, working on the international side, kind of this hybrid sales logistics position. During that period, I met another friend, and he was in the wealth management business. And he'd asked me a couple of times as we got to know each other a little more, "Hey, would you ever consider, coming into this business and maybe working at my firm? It's a great firm, all of these things." And I said, "No, I'm really happy. I'm traveling the world, pushing bourbon. How much better can it get?" But over time, I considered it a little more, and he's a pretty convincing guy, which is why he's so successful. And I ended up making that switch. This was, about 3-4 years ago, and didn't really know what I was getting into. So fortunately, I kept one foot in the door and still do some work with Blanton's. But yeah, so I made that shift over to wealth management. There were some things I loved, some other things that I didn't like quite so much. Then we could fast forward and get to the why I kind of struck out and decided to develop my own firm. But it's a really good fit for me as a whole because I do like those planning elements. I do like talking with people. I like relating to people and all of those things. And I just felt like wealth management gets a little bit too bureaucratic, a little bit too stuffy. I think when people think about going to talk to a wealth advisor, a financial advisor, whatever, they feel like they're getting ready to go plan their funeral and pick out a casket. And I don't want it to feel that way. I want it to be fun. I want people to actually enjoy thinking about their future instead of dreading it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that the planning aspect, right? Sounds like that was a really nice fit. So what were some of the things that you liked about financial planning, working for a firm, and some of the things that ultimately led you to strike out on your own? I think, if I'm not mistaken, real estate was a part of that in terms of what you were incentivized to essentially advise clients to do. But would love to hear a little bit about what ultimately led you to start your practice.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's difficult to answer, to be honest with you, because there are so many kind of bits and pieces that on their own weren't really a big deal, but combined in the timing of things and COVID happening and my daughter being born and some of the things going on in my life kind of collided with some of my thoughts on the business side of things. And it kind of just really made for this situation where I said, okay, this is the right time. I should go ahead and do this. But kind of going back to where I was before, I love the wealth management space in the sense that I'm fascinated by this stuff, right? I love learning about it. Even now, where I'm doing it every day, I still just really enjoy reading some white paper on some fascinating topic that I maybe don't understand as well as I want to. And I love thinking about the future, and I get excited about the world 20 years from now. And I get excited when I think about the world that my 1-year-old daughter is going to live in, where I look around, so many other people are so scared of the future and they're so worried about things going wrong. I don't see most of those things, and maybe that's not always a good thing, but I'm very optimistic. I really believe that things are improving, even when we don't see them in the news and we don't see them in the media. And that's the part I like. I like talking about the future with people and hopefully shining a positive light on things and getting people excited about their future and what they can achieve and hopefully being just a small part of enabling people to find success in a way that they want to. But there were also some things I didn't like. And namely, it was around how I could do these things. And as you know, anytime you get in a big company, for that company to operate efficiently, they just have to kind of put people in boxes, and this is your role and this is your role, and you stay in your box, you stay in your lane. And I struggled with that because there were some things I wanted to provide, some advice I wanted to provide. And you brought up the real estate thing. If a client came to me and really wanted to talk about buying real estate or something like that, I had to be pretty careful about, especially if it's an investment property, about how much advice I could provide on that investment, since it was kind of outside of the firm. You didn't want to, sell away clients when they could be putting their money with you. They're putting it somewhere else, and things like that. On the marketing end, I really wanted to do a podcast. I really wanted to spend time creating content, writing. I love to write, and I couldn't do those things. So I wasn't spending my day in a way that really kind of was peak happiness for me, Yeah. And I struggled with that a little bit. And I've said this on some other platforms, and I truly believe it. Peak performance occurs when you can be yourself and when you can play to your strengths. And I really wasn't feeling that I was operating at peak capacity. So I wanted to make a change to hopefully get to that point.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And the limitations, right? I think that's one of the key things that drives a lot of people to start something of their own is, being stuck in that structure and not being able to, do the things that you really want to do, create, advise people on what you felt like was the best full picture versus just, hey, here's the one thing that you're allowed to talk about, even though there's all these other things that might be a great fit, and, being stuck in that structure. So James, what's it been like starting the practice? What has been that experience, and what are some of the challenges that you've had to face early on?
Well, on the whole, it's been fantastic. It led me to a world of things that are out there that I actually had no clue existed. There are financial tools that are just incredible that I didn't have access to before. There are platforms to work with my clients that are out there that are very easy to use, very intuitive, and great fits for my clients. So there's a whole world, a whole suite of things out there that I had no clue about. So it's been really exciting to not just learn what those things are, but to incorporate them into my practice and get client feedback and determine what's the best, way forward. Is that something you like? Is that something you didn't like? So really building the practice that I want, that gets me excited. But there have been some challenges, no doubt. And as you can imagine, and as you know, with what you're doing with Ostrich, and I don't know, maybe not to the same extent, but it's a very, very heavily regulated industry. And for a small business, I mean, big firms have compliance departments that are staffed with many, many, many people. So, trying to make sure that I'm doing all of the things I need to do by the book, and the book is massive, is definitely a challenge. But again, there are tools out there that make those tasks easier, and it's a matter of finding them and implementing them. So you're juggling. As you know, as an entrepreneur, you're juggling. And right when you get into a good flow with 4 balls, here comes another one. So that's the challenge. It's making sure you're spending your time on things that are actually productive. And for me, productive means, are they benefiting my clients, or is it just something that makes me feel good? Because ultimately my job is to make sure my clients feel good. And that's what I want to do.
Yeah. No, I love that. And the compliance piece is definitely a whole monster in and of itself. There's just, especially if you're creating, right? So creating a podcast, if you're writing, like there's so many things that you have to think about when you're in such a heavily regulated industry that, most people don't even think about. They can post whatever picture, say whatever they want on social media, and it is what it is, right? They might get a little blowback from, if they've got strong opinions, but beyond that, it's not like they've got to worry about regulatory bodies coming down on them.
Yeah, I had a conversation the other day, and I think I got a little animated. So I'll try to keep it a little calmer today. But, I was thinking about the medical profession, and I could be wrong. I don't want, any doctors or whoever you might have listening to come at me, but the amount of information on clients that I have to keep, understand before I can implement certain things with them. And then I think about going to a doctor where I fill out a form, yes, but the doctor's in there for 3 minutes, didn't ask me anything. and then they just prescribe something. I'm like, it seems like, as important as money is, health is probably even more important, or not probably, health is more important. So I feel like there's certainly an outsized eye on the financial space, but you could obviously argue it's for good measure and to keep people from getting taken, if you will, by bad players.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's obviously a purpose. That's interesting comparing it to the medical profession. I think collectively, the last time I saw the doctors, like the last 3 or 4 times, I maybe saw them for like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. If you add up the entire time, those 3 visits, right? It was maybe 5 minutes the whole time. Cause it's like, I wasn't one of the 80-year-old clients that had a lot of problems. Right. So,
Yeah, not yet.
yeah. Knock on wood. Hopefully it stays that way. But it's very, very interesting how another still heavily regulated industry, just in different ways, operates.
It is, and it can be frustrating at times, but it's one of those things. It's kind of the cost of entry. So you do those things, you do them well, and you create as few problems for yourself as you can later. So that's kind of the attitude I try to take.
I like that. So what are some of the things that make your practice unique, that make it different? And maybe it's talking about the kind of like target customers you go after or how you work with them. But I'm curious, what are some of the things that make you unique?
It's a great question. I think it goes back to kind of the origin of how I built the firm. Instead of starting with what experiences did I like my prior firms and trying to replicate those, I started with what do I not like? What do I not think the clients like? And I tried to find ways to ensure that they were not part of the experience with clients of Vermillion Private Wealth. So that was my starting point. But some of the things I think that are different, I was willing to step out a little bit and try some different things. And a good example is the custodian platform that we use. We use Altruist, which the CEO, Jason Wink, is just an incredible guy. They've got a great team of people behind the scenes really working to modernize and provide broader accessibility of financial services. And they're doing an incredible job. They're very young though, and they don't have the robust system that a Schwab does. And, some people might have said, hey, I need to check all of these boxes. But for me, the important part was, will this work? Does it meet these requirements? Yes. Okay, that's good. Are they improving? Are they really trying? Are they listening? Are they accepting feedback? What's really behind the scenes? What's that culture like? And that to me was the difference when you look at some of the existing traditional finance and then you look at some of the new stuff out there. There's a culture gap. And I would rather, for the most part, work with people where there's a cultural fit and maybe there's a feature missing that I can figure out a way to plug something else in than to go with someone that's a terrible culture fit. It doesn't work with what I'm trying to do. But it's got 500 features, only 10 of which I use. So that was another thing that I think kind of makes what we're doing a little bit differently or a little bit different. And then frankly, you kind of alluded to it. I serve a younger clientele. I don't see myself as a salesperson. I truly see myself as a portfolio manager and a financial advisor, not someone who my job every day is to go get new clients. Now, of course, I have to get more clients. That's part of, my livelihood and keeping this business going and growing. So that's definitely a part of my everyday routine. But I'm patient. I can play the long game. And I know if I take care of my clients, if I provide an experience that they actually enjoy instead of dread, the growth will take care of itself. And I was listening to a podcast recently. I think it was Arnold Vandenberg. He said when he was young, this is, he's probably in his 70s and growing his business, he focused so much on trying to get new clients every day. And he was realizing he said he had the best prospect you could ever imagine. They were ready to do business with somebody, and he was the first one there. And he didn't get the business. And he said, what I realized was I was spending too much time worrying about getting the business. I wasn't spending enough time being prepared. So he reset his life, focused on preparation and becoming knowledgeable and putting his platforms and systems and getting his mind prepared. And he said the business started flowing in. So that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. I'm doing the things that I enjoy, and I'm trying to create an experience that will help my clients become advocates and help grow my business that way. And we'll see how well that will work. But I think it's doing pretty well so far.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it kind of goes back to the whole planning aspect, right? When we're talking about why you ended up in the Air Force, right? Is thinking ahead and planning, preparing, making sure that you're creating a great experience that your customers, clients are going to absolutely love.
Yeah. A lot of financial advisors are very impatient, which, it's not what you'd really want or expect. But when you're trying to hit some quarterly or some monthly metric, and that's all you're focused on, I think you're really doing yourself and your clients and your future clients a disservice. So, yes, those things are still important for me to grow my business, but that's not what I'm going to focus on when I need to be focusing on the clients themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can't remember the stat, but it's like somewhere around like maybe 10, depending on what industry you are, 10 times more expensive to go get a net new customer than it is to just work with an
Right.
existing customer and help them see
Yeah,
success. So
absolutely.
growing your client base internally and helping them be successful also helps you as an advisor.
Yeah. And my clients are in their, late 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they're going to come into a lot more money. They're going to earn more as they grow their own businesses. A lot of them are entrepreneurs themselves, or as they move up the structure at their current place of employment. We're getting ready to see a massive, massive transfer of wealth coming up over the next decade. So a lot of those clients are going to inherit money, and they're going to need someone to help them determine what the best use of that is. And my future revenue is already here. It's just a matter of time. And I kind of look at it that way, and adding new clients is bonus, but I also want to make sure those clients are a good fit both for me and for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So along those lines then, James, what are some tips, advice you have for someone who maybe hasn't worked with a financial advisor before, but has thought about it, is interested, wants to explore it? Like, what are some of the things that you should look for?
It's a great question. I tend to want to say some of the industry standard stuff about fiduciaries and all that stuff. And that's fine. People can Google those things. But what I would really just tell people is make sure that culture is there. And on the investment side, when I'm looking to choose a new stock to add to a portfolio, for example, I really try to look at a company's culture. Is that a place I would want to work? Do they have a mission that's really inspiring, or is the mission just to make money? Making money is obviously a big part of the equation of whether or not that's a suitable stock for me to select. But companies with that mission that is really inspirational, both to employees and to customers, that's really important. And I would say that's very important with an advisor too. Make sure that advisor, when you're talking to them, that it's just a good fit, that you get along, because this is someone you want to be honest with and talking about your life and the good and the bad and sometimes the ugly. It's someone that you want to be able to relax around instead of, like I mentioned earlier, feeling like you're planning your funeral. So yeah, you want to feel good about it. It doesn't have to be, younger clients in particular don't want to feel like everything is a white tie affair. Sometimes they want to just go in and have a conversation, and they want to get some things off their chest, and they want to, plan for their future, but not in a way where they're uncomfortable. Sometimes they might just want to have a glass of bourbon with you and talk through some of their goals and aspirations. A financial partner is kind of the way I look at it, not just someone who's going to tell you we need to make some adjustments to your asset allocation. Like, yeah, that's all important. But if you don't enjoy having those discussions with that person, it's probably not going to be a very fruitful relationship.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That culture fit and being able to build trust and really connect with an advisor makes complete sense and creates a better relationship, as you said, for the long term, right? Because
Definitely.
the idea of switching advisors every year is not advised, nor will that probably lead to success. So finding someone that
No,
truly is a good partner is key.
definitely. Yep.
James, you talked about really being interested in the future and that you're very optimistic. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the things you are most optimistic for, or things that you're really excited about based on what you're seeing in terms of investments and just in general?
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. So you might have to stop us at some point, because I can really go on, for a long time. But And I'll kind of start more broadly and just say, and I wrote a piece about rosy retrospection and the idea that people view the past more favorably than it was. And that leads to them thinking worse about the future. And I think that's a big problem investors have. They underestimate how good it's going to be in the future. And in a couple pieces, I've used historical references. I always talk about 1968. And as everyone probably knows, that was a pivotal year in American history. A lot of very difficult things were going on during that time. And I think a lot of people had a hard time seeing light at the end of the tunnel for America and for themselves and their children and their futures. And there are going to be times like 1968 where we're looking at each other saying, oh my gosh, like, are we going to survive this? And it's very scary. I mean, COVID was that to an extent. 9/11 was that to an extent, the financial crisis. But we get through them and things go on and we learn from them and we make things better. And we're never going to be perfect. We're certainly not now. But thinking about the world through that lens of how difficult things have been in the past and how we got through them and generally came out better on the other end gets me thinking about the future. You can see that reflected in my portfolio management style, by the way, because you'll see a lot of things that are kind of based on what I think are macro trends that are shaping the future. Things like artificial intelligence and deep learning, robotics and digital wallets and decentralized finance, genomic coding and some of the healthcare possibilities around some of that work that's going on. So all of these things, I see brilliant people doing brilliant work, and it's not in the news every day. I honestly don't even watch the news all that often because it's not particularly useful, in my opinion. But yeah, those are the things I get excited about. And I think about the problems we're solving now. And of course, we're going to have new problems. I mean, right now, some of the things that are happening in the green energy space and things happening that are going to help us solve the climate crisis. Now, granted, we push that shit to the very edge. We wait until we're staring down the barrel before we decide to do something. But when we decide to do it, we usually do it pretty quickly and with a lot of force. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. So yeah, I really do. I see so much opportunity for investors. I see so much opportunity to make everyday life better for people. I want my money to benefit from that as well. And I think it will.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot, James. And I think that you're spot on in terms of how we look at the past and have those rose-colored glasses and we forget about all the bad stuff and how we're feeling and just, we came out of it. So therefore, there were actually good things that happened. And, we missed that a lot of the same things that we're experiencing now is what we're experiencing 50, 100, 200 years ago, whether in history, but we just don't recognize that there's that same level of conflict and feel like, the future's the challenging part.
Yeah.
Where do you recommend people go to, if you're not consuming the news, if I want to educate myself, I want to get smarter about some of these different emerging areas that could be great investments or just interesting things to know because our world's going to change because of them. Where do you recommend people go to find that type of information?
Here's what I see happening. It goes all directions. You have a choice every day of what information you want to consume. If you are thinking very evil, mean thoughts, you can go find a community of people who will echo those thoughts and make you feel good about them. You can do the same with people who are very positive about the future. You can do the same with really any opinion you have. You can go find someone, no matter how ridiculous that opinion may be, you're going to find a group of people out there who will make you feel like you are absolutely right. And that's where we're at. I'm not saying it's the worst thing of all time. I'm just saying it's what I think is a truth of where we're at with social media and rapid fire information and reducing very complex ideas into headlines. What I have done is I've really tried to read more books, actual books. I know it's foreign to a lot of people, it seems, but reading podcasts. Sometimes you don't need some quote unquote expert who's going to make money off of telling you the news to talk about something. You can hear two people like us having a conversation about it, and maybe you learn something that way. And then even social media, there are really good opportunities. I have learned an incredible amount of information in certain areas, in particular, artificial intelligence and decentralized finance, DeFi, because there are some brilliant, brilliant people who openly share their knowledge in places like Twitter. Now, the danger is you can create your own little bubble where, like I said, you're hearing exactly what you want to hear. So I think being self-aware and understanding that those things can happen, and trying to make sure, just like you would diversify your investments, make sure you're diversifying your information and not getting married to some idea, that you remain open-minded. But I think largely it's a choice. You can choose to be open-minded and choose to go find information a different way, or you can choose to sit around and watch the news and get angry and frustrated and fearful about the future.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're spot on. It's so easy now to find the whatever you're looking for online. There's someone's created a blog, a community, a subreddit, whatever it is, a Discord server, something where you can find
Absolutely.
Find like-minded individuals. So being able to diversify your information, I think is absolutely spot on. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into DeFi specifically. So decentralized finance. I think that's such a interesting space, and in the context of when we're recording this, which is early July 2021, there was a big project that Mark Cuban was invested in the DeFi space that I think a couple of weeks ago went from looked like it was doing well to zero. So I'm curious, like, what are you seeing in the DeFi space? What are your thoughts, whether it's following certain people on Twitter, or like, what are you thinking when it comes to decentralized finance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a really interesting time. I think we're not even in inning number one yet. I think we're still warming up prior to the game and stretching. So I don't have really strong opinions on it just yet. I think people always want to hear some opinion, right? I'm open to admit that I'm learning right there along with everyone. Where I don't want to find myself, especially as a financial advisor, is 5 or 6 years from now, as if the industry's changing and the financial world's changing, and I'm totally ignorant to it because I said, oh, this is silly, I don't believe in this, or this isn't beneficial to me, so I'm going to ignore it for a decade. So what I'm really trying to do is learn. I'll give you an example. I just started the cohort actually today for the certified digital asset advisor. So it's the first certification that financial advisors can get to have that certification to advise clients on digital assets. Now, my goal is not to go build a practice on advising on digital assets. That's not where I'm at. That's not where my mind is, but I want to be informed and I want to understand these concepts. And I think it goes back to 2008. That's when Bitcoin was created. Coming at, financial crisis was happening. Public trust in financial institutions was not high, to say the least. And another system was offered up. And of course, it's been a 13-year journey from then to now, and a lot's changed. And now there's this whole budding space of DeFi and digital assets, a lot of which is probably going to prove to be absolutely nothing. And you're going to hear a lot of those stories of this token or this coin or this digital asset or this cryptocurrency that ended up being absolutely nothing. But on the other hand, I do think that finance system is going to be upended at some point, not in a bad way, but it's going to advance. The internet does almost everything at this point, and it's hasn't really been able to disrupt traditional finance. And I think that is going to happen in our lifetime. And I just want to understand the concepts. I want to understand, what is cryptography? What is Bitcoin mining? Well, when people say mining, what do they mean? When you hear about the blockchain, what is the blockchain? How might that apply to my clients? Or what other technologies could the blockchain be used for? So it really, if nothing else, is exploring what other questions I come up with and trying to seek answers. And I do get excited about it. I don't know where it's going, but I think the possibilities, I think it's probably like the very, very early days of the internet. We can't even fathom at this point. You hear about black swans, like these bad events that no one saw coming. I think there are also reverse black swans, these good things that we never could anticipate. And I think when you look back 20 years on around this time, I think it'll be one of the big things. The 90s was the internet boom. I think this kind of period of time will be a shift in finance to a largely digital ecosystem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. And I wasn't trying to get you to take one opinion, or just interested in what you're seeing, because there is a lot of noise,
So much noise.
specifically around cryptocurrencies. But
and I'm not advocating anyone go load up on cryptocurrencies. All I'm saying is I love thinking about these things. And I think if you are going to do something like that, or if you're considering buying some cryptocurrency, you need to do the same thing. You need to educate yourself and make sure you actually understand what it is you're doing, what it is you're buying. And a question I always ask, why? If someone comes to me and says, hey, James, I've been looking at this particular stock or this particular cryptocurrency, do you think I should buy some? Well, first off, I probably haven't done the research on that exact asset. So I'm not going to give them a buy or sell opinion. But second, I usually ask them why. If they have a compelling reason and a thesis as to why they came to conclude that this would be a potentially good investment, then it probably will be okay for them to do that. But a lot of times it's, well, it's that FOMO, it's that hype, it's that seeing crypto millionaires and wanting to be on. That's not a good why. If your why is because everyone else is doing it, you probably need to go back to the drawing board and really think about how you're choosing your investments.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. There's just so many different coins that pop up and they just try to price them so they're super low. So if it goes to $1, but there's, I don't know how many trillions of coins out there, or, it's
the Wild West. It really is. When I look at that space, I can never even keep up. Even if I tried, I couldn't probably keep up if I had a team of 10 people. So what I'm really trying to do is go back. Bitcoin, to me, that was kind of the base. The Bitcoin white paper was really kind of what started this whole movement. So that's kind of where I'm starting, and making sure that I at least have a base level understanding of why it was created, how it might impact the future. And then I can start to look at, does it make sense to include, whether it's Bitcoin or potentially some other digital asset, as a portion of client portfolios? Does it make sense to include 3% or 5% allocation into a growth portfolio because Bitcoin is largely uncorrelated? Those are the questions I want to ask. And I'm not to the stage at this point in feeling comfortable coming up with those conclusions, but I want to get there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's I'm thinking about the underlying use case for a coin, right? Like Ethereum has shown that as a blockchain, you're able to build smart contracts, and NFTs have come off of that, primarily off of Ethereum and Ether. So thinking about like, what are the actual uses that people are actually, is there utility in something? Or is it just, maybe it'll be Dogecoin and go to and someone will keep buying it as a joke. I don't know.
There are a lot of shit coins out there, right?
Exactly. Well, James, we've kind of taken this into a very decentralized conversation around cryptocurrency, which wasn't the intent. Kind of bringing it back to your practice and what you see for the future. How do you define success? Like, what does success look like to you today?
Oh, I love these questions. I really do, because it makes you reflect and examine yourself. I think, to me, it really doesn't even have anything to do with money or objects. I would say it's how happy I am and satisfied I am with myself, and how proud of myself I am. If I can look in the mirror every day and feel like I'm doing a pretty good job, then that's success. And, we all have our demons and we all have our areas for improvement that, we need to work on. But I want to feel like I'm learning every day, that I'm challenging myself, that I'm trying to be a good husband, that I'm trying to be a good dad, a good friend, a good advisor. If I'm doing those things and I feel good about myself and I feel good about what I'm doing, then that to me is success. Pretty simple, but
it is. Yeah. Getting a good night's sleep and being able to feel good about what you're doing, what you're putting out into the world, and what you're accomplishing. I think that's absolutely a great measure. So we've talked a lot about finance in general. What would you say is the best investment that you've made yourself?
The best investment? Well, people who have listened to my podcast probably know the answer to this. And at least from a return standpoint, at least as far as stocks go, from a return standpoint, it would be Tesla. That said, probably the best investment I ever made was some of the early real estate transactions I did, because I was 24, 25 years old and had some nice, singles, doubles, and triples that allowed me to reinvest and put me in a position to have a better start than I would have had otherwise. So probably I would say that some of those real estate transactions early on.
Yeah. So what type of real estate? I think everyone's familiar with Tesla. So what type of real estate investments were you making?
Yeah. So, I'll go back just a little bit. I was in the Air Force, and a good friend of mine was here in Lexington. And we had kind of talked about real estate before. And when I was a kid, I was fascinated with those flipping shows and all that stuff. I can remember sitting around the living room with my parents and telling them, I'm going to do that one day. That looks fun. So I did. So that friend ended up kind of managing the actual projects, and I was more on the analysis side. So what we did, we basically took a year, tried to learn as much as we could about real estate, from the local markets to financing to actually managing a construction project, to, the numbers. And to me, the numbers part, as you can imagine, that's where I had a lot of fun. And I spent a lot of time. I can remember sitting around and looking around, looking at a house that's for sale, going home and basically running a simulation. What would this need to look like for this deal to make sense and for me to make money? And I found an online community called Bigger Pockets, which I know you're aware of. Probably a lot of the listeners are aware of too, but if not, it's a great place for learning about real estate investing. And I just dug in, and I started reading everything I could. I started interacting. I started asking questions. I started writing for them. I was the writer who provided the novice point of view. So that was, that was kind of fun. And I just really enjoyed it. And then after that year or so, we bought our first house. And I think I ended up doing, I don't know, probably about 20 flips and made money on 19.
Nice. That's awesome.
So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and definitely check that out. Right. I think you were one of the first few guests on Bigger Pockets.
Yeah. And I have no idea why Josh Dorkin and Brandon Turner had me on, because frankly, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was a young guy who was just getting started. So I don't know if they were throwing me a bone or what, or if they were that desperate at the time. I think it was episode 22 or 3, but it was a lot of fun, and it made me uncomfortable being on that podcast. And anytime I can make myself uncomfortable, I feel like I learn a lot. So that was a good primer for things to come.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And definitely, yeah, if you're interested in real estate investing, Bigger Pockets is a great community podcast, tons of books now.
Oh yeah.
Forums, and you can find deals now on there. They keep expanding what all's on the platform, but it's
big
a great
time
community. Now. Yeah. So definitely worth checking out. James, we don't always make good decisions. What would you say is the dumbest money mistake that you've made?
Oh, wow. It's never fun talking about your mistakes, is it? But I think it's really important. I made the same mistake twice, actually. And I've done a lot of silly stuff, especially when I was younger and had a harder time envisioning 20, 30 years out than I do now. One of the reasons I understand the importance of really getting my clients to understand the long-term perspective is because I had a hard time doing that. When I was younger, I was really hell-bent on fast moving things. I liked the excitement of it, almost a gambler's, not almost, it really was a gambler's mentality. So I made a lot of those mistakes, but something that sticks out to me is, this is the one that still bothers me, I guess. I didn't take my own advice, as far as when you have a high conviction, an idea or a company or a stock or whatever it is, and you really understand it very well. That's especially when you need to tune the noise out and stick with your thesis and go from there. And I hate to bring Tesla back into the fold, but I'm going to anyway. I sold a good chunk of my Tesla position way too early because I got freaked out by what people who probably didn't know what they were talking about were saying. And, that's one of the bigger regrets. And it's not just because of the money I missed out on. It was because of the feeling I had of I didn't stick to what I believed in. And I allowed myself to be influenced by outside noise. So that was kind of like the disappointing part, shame. You like look in the mirror and you're just mad at yourself. And again, it wasn't so much the money, but just that feeling. But I learned a valuable lesson. And that's one of the reasons I really have these conversations with my clients. And I really have that conversation with myself when I'm managing money. Why would I make this change? If I don't have a good reason to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm not getting paid on churning portfolios. I'm getting paid because people trust me to help them reach their goals. It's a fight you have to fight every day, because it's very easy to find reasons to be active when the best thing to do is not to be active. So that's one. And I'll give you another one too. Another one was, and this goes really, it's an entrepreneurship lesson as much as it is a money lesson. A couple times I've quit too soon. And I say that not in like a quitter's mentality, like I give up, but in the sense that, and it really goes back to that real estate piece. I was building a nice little real estate business. And again, I allowed myself to be spooked. This was back, several years ago. Everyone's saying interest rates are going to go up. Housing market's overpriced. Like we're going to see another 08, 09. Here it comes. And I ended up divesting a lot of that, which luckily I put into things that also did well. But again, I let that noise influence my decision. And I mean, look at the housing market today compared to 6 years ago, 5 years ago. Would have been fine. I would have done just fine had I left it in there. So those are two of the lessons. Unfortunately, the same lesson twice, but I think I finally learned it that second time.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's very easy to get spooked or distracted or, let other opinions, which you should be taking in other information, but also, making sure that it's, valid and not just from someone who's just has a loud voice and doesn't really know what they're talking about. So,
well, let's face it. I mean, most of those people, or at least a good chunk of them, they're getting paid for clicks and views and things like that. So the louder and more obnoxious they are, and the more fear they can conjure up, oftentimes the better they do. So their interests aren't necessarily aligned with what you're trying to achieve. So I think people just need to keep that in mind.
James, along those lines, what would you say is the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that people are facing today when it comes to finances and building wealth?
That's a good one. I think expectations are really challenging. I think people set their sights too low, to be perfectly honest. I know it's probably not what you were expecting me to say, but I've noticed this with a lot of my younger clients. They're making good money. They're doing a pretty good job of saving. They're investing. And then when you go to sit down with them and talk about the future, they vastly underestimate what they're probably going to achieve, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, that's better than overestimating what you're going to achieve. But I think a lot of that is maybe a humility thing. People don't want to, like, weird to talk about being rich in the future, especially if you come from like a humble background. But I think a lot of it too is just not understanding how powerful some of these things are. I mean, compounding. I think we talked about it when you came on my show. It's incredibly powerful. And when you run even just some basic future value calculations with somebody, you will oftentimes blow their mind because they just can't wrap their head around how a relatively small amount of money, along with some contributions over time and compounding returns, can just absolutely blow the top off. So I want to get people excited about the future, and I don't want to get them thinking about buying yachts, but I mean, if they do, even better. But I want to get them thinking about being successful. And I think when people can start to taste it and feel it, and they can start to see it, that gives them a little extra fire to keep doing what they're doing instead of getting discouraged after the first 2 or 3 years. Because as you know, with compounding, when you look at that chart, that's the whole nature of compounding. It hits that velocity. Yeah. I try to keep people focused and really thinking longer term. And I think that's the challenge. Everything is so short term today. It's quarter to quarter. It's month to month. It's day to day. Was the market up or down today? And it distracts people. They underestimate the long-term impact, and they overestimate the short-term fluctuations.
No, I love that. I think that's a great answer. The expectations is definitely something that, especially if you're just thinking short-term and not thinking about long-term, don't understand compound interest. It's easy to feel helpless that you never can really get ahead, or that, you're not doing enough because you saw someone on social media who did, whatever, bought that
Exactly.
shit coin and ended up, yeah, and doubled their money in 2 days. And you're like, why didn't I do that? So I think on both sides of the equation, I think that's a great observation.
Yeah. And maybe it's a little counterintuitive because of course there are a lot of people out there who are overestimating what they're going to do. But I found that most people, they just don't see and maybe it goes back to that rosy retrospection thing, or maybe it just goes back to some of those concepts and some probably cognitive biases that people have, but it's really hard for people to imagine just this abundant future. But I think if you go back and ask your grandparents, or, if you could go back and ask your great grandparents, things probably turned out a lot better for a lot of people than they expected. And what I would like to see is to more people to have that experience, people who didn't have access to some of the things that are out there, the concepts, the education, for those people to have those same futures ahead of them, and to not only have them ahead of them, but to just be able to see them and to be able to reach for them.
Yeah.
And I know you're working on that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're aligned there. And this goes back to what you were talking about earlier about how you see the future in more of a positive light, right? I think that's exactly what I heard there is things will be better. They can get better. And if you stop listening to all of the instant, let me grab your attention right now, the world's on fire and everything's terrible and horrendous, and look past that and look at what's going on and see the positive things and see how things can get better, you'll have just a completely different experience in life.
Absolutely. And there's that famous Jeremy Siegel quote: "Fear incites human action far more urgently than does the impressive weight of historical evidence." And that is so true, right? I mean, all signs can be pointing one way, but if something freaks people out, they're going to lose their minds.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That fear, uncertainty, and doubt that motivates that fight or flight instinct that kicks into our lizard brains when that gets triggered. So yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. James, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down, and we talked about the practice, the wealth management practice. We didn't even talk about the other business that you have, which we'll have to save that for another conversation. Because I think there's a lot of lessons that learn there. And I know we talked about it a little bit on your podcast. So have to save that for a round two, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I really appreciate you sitting down. It's been a lot of fun. If you could leave the audience with any last words that you want to impart them with, and then also please let us know how we can connect with you outside of this podcast.
Yeah, I would just say, if you're not investing or thinking about your future, start today. It doesn't matter where you're at. It doesn't matter if you're doing well or if you're struggling. It doesn't matter if you're 17 or 70. If you start now, you're probably going to be better off than you would be if you didn't. So I would say that's the parting wisdom I would give someone and give the listeners. And then you guys can find me online. Obviously, you mentioned the podcast, Bulls, Bears, and Bourbon. So they can listen to that anywhere where they're listening to your podcast. And then vermillionprivatewealth.com. That'll take you to my website. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, all those fun things. I'm notoriously bad at social media though. So take that for what it's worth.
Awesome. And all the links will be in the show notes for sure. But James, thanks again for sitting down. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it, William. Good stuff. And I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you.
On your way out, please share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs and top performers. And of course, pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Have a very profitable day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place. Some words got you searching for the bright side over and over.